What up, Wizards? It's Dev, your preferred previous season guy. I'm from Mtg. We like it in Magic, especially on days like this, because it feels like we've waited forever for Forgotten Realms to come out. In some other ways, it feels like Strixhaven kind of just came out, but I've been really anticipating this spoiler season. I wanted it so bad, and it's finally here. So if you don't mind, I think I'm going to go ahead and start talking about cards, because I have like 40 of them to cover today, and that's kind of a lot. So let's get to it. Now, if you're new to spoiler season here on the channel, how we do things is we like to start from the bottom and kind of work our way up to what I think are the most powerful cards of the day. But today I'm going to start with a bunch of dragons that I'm super hype about. So let's look at green dragon, black dragon, and adult gold dragon. Not a baby, it's a fully grown adult. Now, AGD is definitely no Goldspan dragon, but it's going to be really sweet in the limited environment where a 4-power flying lifelink is pretty decent, even for 5 mana, but the other two are a little bit more interesting, starting with Black Dragon. This is 7 mana, 5 and 2 black, for a 4/4 dragon with flying and acid breath. When it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 until end of turn. And Green Dragon is 6 mana, 4 and 2 green for a 4/4 dragon with flying that has poison breath. So they both have breath abilities. When Green Dragon enters the battlefield until end of turn, whenever a creature an opponent controls is dealt damage, destroy it. Now, first thing I want to point out with both of these is that these are not like actual keyword abilities. You'll see this a lot on cards in this set, where they reference D&D abilities, but they are not overarching mechanics in the set. Like, we probably won't see another card with poison breath like Green Dragon has. We probably won't see another card with acid breath like Black Dragon has. These are fairly one-off keyword abilities that we're seeing an awful lot of already on spoiler season day 1. And honestly, I'm not actually sure how I feel about this. Some people really like the fact that they're, doing one-off keywords that reference D&D stuff. And I think that's great. For people that like it, that's cool. But I'm still not sure exactly how I feel about one-off keywords. I'm trying not to be that guy. Now, there are more dragons, but we'll talk about the rest of them a little bit later. For now, I want to look at Charm Sleep and Guild Thief. Now, Charm Sleep is a reprint. It's just one of those things, a blue enchantment that taps a creature and keeps it tapped. So there's that for limited. But Guild Thief is a new card. This is 1 and a blue for a 1/1 Orc Rogue. Nice. And when it deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It also has Cunning Action, which is really just an activated ability that costs 3 and a blue, and you have it not be able to be blocked this turn. So it can go unblockable for 4 mana, which is kind of a lot. But I still think this is probably at least decent as a 2-drop in limited. If it gets through a couple of times and then becomes a mana sink that, leads to guaranteed damage, I think that's actually better than a lot of limited 2-drops, to be honest. I don't think it affects standard in any way. It's a little bit underpowered, and even though it's got the right creature type for a important standard deck, it really doesn't do anything that deck wants to do. So I'm not really seeing it much in standard, but I do think it's a decent little 2-drop in limited, even though it's a bit underpowered in terms of stats, and that's not usually what you want out of your 2-drop. It can take over the game given the right circumstances. Let's also check out Dueling Rapier and 50 Feet of Rope, which I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. This is just a 1-mana artifact with 3 different abilities. You can climb over, that's tap, target wall can't block this turn. You can tie up, just pay 3 and tap it. Target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Or you can repel down, that's 4 mana tap, venture into the dungeon, activate only as a sorcery. We just did a whole video on how dungeons work. I'll leave that in the description if you haven't seen it yet. But all things considered, I think that maybe the best thing on this is obviously the tie-up mode, and even that is fairly mana intensive. It also doesn't tap the creature. The creature already has to be, tapped in that case. I think this is really cool flavor, and I do like that the joke here is like how utilitarian a length of rope can be in an adventure. I think that's cute, but altogether, just it's not amazing, obviously. Now, Dueling Rapier, on the other hand, I actually kind of like more than I probably should. It's just 1 red mana for an artifact and it's equipment. It has flash, and when it ETBs, you attach it to a creature you control. A equipped creature gets +2/+0, and this actual equip cost is 4, which is off the wall expensive, but just for 1 mana at instant speed +2/+0 forever is actually kind of not bad. You throw this down on like Fervent Champion or Robber of the Rich. I mean, compare this to Rimrock Knight. Rimrock Knight is probably a better card because it comes with the body attached and all that. But still, +2/+0 at instant speed, that again, sticks around forever is good. You know, your opponent decides to make blocks or not make blocks, and then you put this on like an unblocked Robber of the Rich, which does 4 damage now, which is a pretty healthy chunk of damage. And then from the rest of the game, your opponent has to deal with a 4-power Robber. That's, I mean, like, I actually don't think this is terrible, even though I don't think that it usurps, you know, any of the slots currently being used in mono red. I just don't think there's a place for it right now. But either way, I think this card is sneakily better than it looks at first glance. Let's kick things up a single notch here with cards that I think are a little bit more powerful, like Moon-Blessed Cleric. That looks really good, but Plundering Barbarian looks okay too. It's 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 2/2 Dwarf Barbarian, and when it ETBs, you choose one. You smash the chest, which is destroy an artifact, or you pry it open, create a treasure token. Reclamation Sage in red, which is pretty dope. I mean, 3 mana for a 2/2 that busts an artifact when it ETBs is already like historically very decent, but if you don't have an artifact to bust up, you just create a treasure token, and this guy was basically just a 2 mana 2/2. I mean, also ramped you too, so like that's not bad for mono red. I just like a little bit about this card, a little bit more than I probably should. It's another one of those cards. I don't know why so many red cards are sticking in my brain today. Moon-Blessed Cleric looks like it's going to be a commander staple forever. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/2 human elf cleric. That's a lot of relevant creature types. It also has Divine Intervention. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, shuffle the library, and put the card on top. Now, putting the card on top kind of sucks, but, you know, tutor for any enchantment is really quite good, even outside of your commander games sometimes, right? The body isn't terrible. At least you get a 3/2. It's on rate, for limited at least. That's somewhat on rate. I think I'd rather have a 2/3 than a 3/2 in a lot of situations, and I think that's going to read as blasphemy to some people, but I'd rather my 3-drop have 3 toughness and not die to 2-drops, thank you very much. But still, even if this does die in combat, it'll probably trade with something, and it's already done its job by replacing itself with the most important enchantment in your deck, so I'm pretty sure this is a playable Magic card, y'all. There's also Tarrasque, which is 9 mana, 6 and 3 green for a legendary dinosaur. It's a 10/10, and when it ETBs, if you cast it, it gains haste and ward 10. And whenever Tarrasque attacks, it fights target creature defending player controls. So if you reanimate this, it's not good. It's not great. It doesn't have the haste. Your opponent can easily take it out with a removal spell. And you have to wait an entire turn before you get that attack trigger. And even when you get the attack trigger in this standard, might not have a creature to fight, depending on what you're playing against. But if you do get the attack trigger and you kill something, you get in for 10, like, it feels really good. But this is specifically not a great reanimation target. It's also not a good blink target for what that's worth. But if you do get to 9 mana and actually cast this, then yeah, 10/10 haste ward 10. It's not bad. It's going to be hard to deal with. It attacks in immediately and kills something, which is also sweet. But it doesn't have trample. If this card had trample, I might look at it a little bit differently. But the lack of trample, you know, means that even if it does have haste, your opponent can still chump block it, you know. It takes out their biggest guy, but they still have like a 1/1, like a dork they can just block this with and then go. So I don't know how impressed I am by Tarrasque. And I know this is a card that means a lot, or at least a character, a figure in D&D that means a lot to a lot of people. So, sorry they didn't do such a great job on the card, but all things considered, I think it's a cool card. I just don't think it's a super competitively playable card, at least with what we know right now. Now up next, let's take a look at Mimic, which I think is a really cool card, and that's why I waited till this late in the video to show it to you. It's just 2 mana for an artifact that is typed with treasure, by the way. And you can tap it and sack it to add a mana of any color, like you can with any treasure, right? Or you can pay 2 and have it become a shapeshifter artifact creature token with base power and toughness 3/3 till end of turn. Now, there are a number of cards in Standard that work with shapeshifters specifically, so little 2-drop shapeshifter that can become a guy. It's always going to be pretty decent against, you know, sorcery speed removal and sweepers. I kind of like that. You know, it's no creature land or anything. It's not crawling barrens, but it's at least similar. It's similar to like a riddle form, for instance, which I think is kind of cool. But it also ramps you mana, and it only costs 2. You know, it's turn 2 ramp in Standard for any deck, and you have to sacrifice it and all that, just like any treasure token. But I still think it's interesting that they gave us turn 2 ramp. You can only use it the one time, but we have turn 2 ramp. And if you play like a Galazeth Prismari a little bit later down the line, then this does tap for any mana, so long as you're just casting instants and sorceries. So there are some very cool things about this card that I think make me like it again more than I should. I've said that a lot today. Now, we saw a ton of cards today that are really interesting. They're modal, and they're all kind of like choose your own adventure stuff, you know. For instance, I'll start with you come to a river and you see a guard approach. So all stuff that your dungeon master says to you to set up a scenario, you know. But you come to a river is 1 and a blue for an instant, choose one. Fight the current, return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Find a crossing is target creature gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked this turn. Really, really cool. I like this a lot. It can be, you know, tempo-based, balanced removal sometimes, but it can also win the game. Sometimes this card just says win the game on it, you know. Give your 5/5 +1/+0, can't be blocked. I win my game of limited. But if it doesn't do that, or if it doesn't get enough damage through for you at any given time, you can just mess with your opponent's board state. I think this card is really good, actually. I'm not sure how much play it sees in Standard, to be honest with you, especially with cards like Brazen Borrower in the format. They're just much better than it, but at least in Limited, I think this is actually a very, very good little blue common, but the same is kind of true if you see a guard approach. This is just 1 blue mana for an instant. Choose one, distract the guard, tap target creature, or hide. Target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. Just for 1 blue mana, a creature you control gains hexproof till end of turn, and these are typically very important cards in like mono blue or blue X tempo decks. So again, just for 1 blue, there's really not a better rate in Standard for that kind of ability. So this is kind of the new dive down, you know. And sometimes it'll get a creature through for combat damage, or tap a creature down that would otherwise attack you and hurt you against your tempo build. So I don't know, I kind of like this a lot too, and I think it's more likely to see Standard play than you come to a river, but probably still not that likely. That said, again, if there is like a mono blue tempo deck out there, then they probably look at this card somewhat hard. Now, when I say there were a bunch of these, I meant it. We saw you find the villain's lair and choose your weapon today. One of these is, I think, better than the other, but choose your weapon. It's 2 and a green. It's an instant. You choose one. With 2 weapon fighting, you double target creature's power and toughness till end of turn. A nice little Unleash Fury effect in green, because green gets everything. Although this isn't a color pie breaker. It makes perfect sense that green would do this. But the other mode is archery. This spell does 5 damage to a creature with flying. So it also takes down a number of really important creatures, you know, any 5 toughness flyers, like Yorions, for instance, that you might come up against. This will take out in your green deck without necessarily having to, you know, keep it in your sideboard all the time. I think this is really neat in the right deck. So I kind of like Choose Your Weapon, but not anywhere near as much as I like You Find the Villain's Lair. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 blue for an instant. Choose one, foil their scheme, you counter target spell, and learn their secrets. Draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. This is very good, isn't it? I mean, am I crazy here? It's a cancel. You know, yet another counterspell in Standard. But it's a cancel that also has one of the modes from Prismari Command on it, draw 2, discard 2, which is also good, you know, if you absolutely need the sweeper at the end of your opponent's turn 3 and you haven't found it yet. You just cast this EOT and look for the sweeper, or look for, you know, some other key card. So I think both modes are usable, playable, and especially after cards like Neutralize rotate, we might see this. But I still think Saw It Coming is probably the better counterspell. But in terms of versatility, you've got an awful lot you can do with this, and I like this card a lot. Well, let's keep going with these Choose Your Own Adventure cards. We got a lot of them today. We got, you see a pair of goblins, and you hear something on watch. Now, you hear something on watch, very ominous sentence, is 2 mana, 1 and a white for an instant. Choose one, rouse the party. Creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. Or set off the traps. This spell deals 5 damage to target attacking creatures. So really kind of cool here, but I'm not sure how much play this ends up seeing. But these are 2 really interesting modes. You know, if you're on defense in your aggro deck, then this kills just about any important attacking creature. Not all of them, but most of them. Your Yorions, your Lovestruck Beasts, and so forth. So that's kind of important, especially against, again, Lovestruck Beasts, which is a card that can brick wall your aggro deck really fast. So it's nice to have an answer to that at instant speed for 2 mana. And Rouse the Party, again, your aggro deck really wants this, you know, especially if a bunch of guys go unblocked or your opponent just doesn't have very developed defenses, then this can deal an extra 3-4 damage, and that's going to be worth it a lot of the time if you have a big enough team. You See a Pair of Goblins is 3 mana, 2 and a red for an instant. I love the name of this card. You can either charge them, creatures you control get +2/+0 till end of turn, or you can befriend them, create 2/1/1 red goblin creature tokens. So it's a strictly better Burn Bright, which, if you're a fan of the streams, is a card that I actually like. Like, unashamedly, I like Burn Bright. So this is just a better version of Burn Bright. That's instant speed. I know Burn Bright already is, but the reason I bring up the instant speed is because it creates 2 guys. It creates 2 tokens at instant speed, and that's actually kind of really good. And, you know, your first copy of this can create the 2 tokens. Your second copy can make them both 3/1s till end of turn. I mean, there's a lot of really cool things about this card. And again, I want to hold back from saying this really sees standard play, but thanks to the instant speed making 2 dudes, it actually could, given the right environment. But now we come to the rares and mythics finally, and it's kind of hard to decide what I want to start this section with, but I think I'll go with the Black Staff of Waterdeep. This is just a single blue mana for a legendary artifact. You may choose not to untap the Black Staff of Waterdeep during your untap step. Animate Walking Statue. You can pay 1 and a blue and tap it. Another target non-token artifact you control becomes a 4/4 artifact creature for as long as the Black Staff of Waterdeep remains tapped. Activate only as a sorcery. So this might be better than I think it is, given that it only costs 1 to cast and 2 to activate. And you keep it tapped for as long as you want. The creature stays a creature. So I think it's not bad. You know, on turn 3, off of casting a 1-mana artifact, you could have a 4/4 guy, but is that actually amazing? I'm not I'm not super sure. I think one of the best things about this is that it's just a 1-mana artifact that has like really good upside some of the time in your Artifacts Matter deck. So I do think this is really cool and will probably do some things. I'm just not really sure what those things are yet. Up next, another 1-mana rare I want to evaluate. That's Minion of the Mighty. Mom is just 1 red mana for a 0/1 kobold. Look at that. With Menace, of all things. Pack Tactics. Whenever Minion of the Mighty attacks, if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater this combat, you may put a dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Really, really cool, but I think it's going to be kind of tough to get the stip off, you know. The stip is 6 power of attacking creatures, and none of them are named Minion of the Mighty because this has 0 power, but obviously you boost this and suddenly it has Menace, and that's interesting. It's really cool they put Menace on a 0 power guy. It's like, please boost this dude. That's how this card works. But even so, I mean, I guess if you only attack with like 1 6 power guy, then you get to throw down another dragon. The problem is you have to have a dragon in your hand, and that's not always going to be the case. I mean, there's just kind of a lot that has to line up to make this card work. So in the end, I'm not sure, but if there's a way to break it, it's very good. But I'm not sure there's a way to break it, to be honest with you. 1 mana is very, very low, and it's like the least a card could cost to start setting cool stuff up. But I'm still not sure the payoff is quite there. Even if you get the payoff, I'm not sure that it's always worth it. But the payoff is going to be a little bit tough to get in the first place. Whoops, just realized I missed a couple of cards. Sorry about that. But they're actually pretty good cards, so they might actually belong in this section. Let's look at Dawnbringer Cleric and Devour Intellect. Devour Intellect is a black mana for a sorcery. Target opponent discards a card. Now, if the mana from a treasure was spent to cast this spell, instead the player reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card, the player discards the card. So you get Thoughtseize without having to lose life if you spent a treasure on this. And I actually think it's super easy to spend a treasure on this. I mean, very, very easy, starting as early as like turn 2 or 3. I'm fairly certain that you can do this, you know. So if you want to 2-for-1 yourself to cast Thoughtseize, I guess there's plenty of ways to do it in the format. I'm not sure how good that play pattern is, to be honest, but again, I do think that on plays that just, you know, give you a treasure incidentally, which there are plenty of cards in Standard that do, and cards that we play in Standard. You know, just imagine Goldspan Dragon, swing in, get a treasure token, you can pop it for 2 black mana. You spend 1 of those black mana on this after your Goldspan attacks and get the best card out of your opponent's hand. So, and you still have a mana left. I mean, all this seems really good. Just making him discard a card on turn 1 isn't terrible either, but I think you really want to get the full amount of juice out of this orange. But we'll move on to Dawnbringer Cleric. This is just 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/3 human cleric. When it ETBs, you choose 1. Now, it's got a charming prince number of ETB triggers on it. Actually, more than that. You either cure wounds, which is gain 2 life. You dispel magic, which is destroy target enchantment. Or you gentle repose, exile target card from a graveyard. Now for 2 mana, this is an unbelievable package. It's not the best in terms of stats, but it is, you know, higher than a Bone Crusher Giant in toughness, so that's okay. You gain 2 life when it comes into play sometimes, which is pretty good against aggro decks. Destroy target enchantment, which is fantastic against a number of decks right now that play all kinds of enchantments. There's a lot of enchantments running around Standard, so, and honestly, just a 2 mana creature that comes down and busts an enchantment is probably good enough on its own. Honestly, just that is probably good. But this gives you 2 other modes, and exile a card from a graveyard is great against Croxes and Pelucranoses and reanimation builds and all that kind of stuff. Elspeth Conquers Death. So I think Dawnbringer is really fantastic. Probably these modes don't add up to enough to make it, worthy of main deck standard play, but I could eat those words. Again, the second mode is maybe just good enough, and if you're not able to use the second mode, then one of the other 2 modes might be. So I like a lot about this card. Just 2 mana for this package and 3 ETB triggers to choose from is a pretty value-rific card. I'd never thought I'd use that word. I feel like a dork now. Value-rific. But it's a lot of value is the point I'm making. Now let's look at Circle of Dreams Druid, and all you really have to know is that this is a GS Cradle on a body. It's 3 green mana for a 2/1 Elf Druid, and you can tap it to add a green for each creature you control. See, I wouldn't lie to you. It's a GS Cradle on a body. This is just 1 toughness for your 3-drop. It doesn't do anything that it comes into play. So I'm fairly certain this is a trap. I'm almost sure that this is a trap, but, I guess if you get to tap it 1 time, it's pretty good. But even then, it might only tap for 1 mana. You play this, your opponent doesn't kill it, they kill your other 2 elves. And suddenly you're like, I was going to tap that for 3, what happened? In the late game, this is great. This probably goes in every elf commander deck. Forever. So I don't want to even say the card's bad, because again, it's probably a commander staple until the literal end of all time in existence. So that's good enough. But in standard, I don't know. I really don't know. I think this is a little bit fragile and a little bit slow. But let's take a look at Treasure Chest, a card that I am personally proud of because I called it. It's 3 mana for an artifact. You can pay 4 and sacrifice it to roll a d20. What did I say in my predictions video? I just want 1 card that has you roll a d20, and here it is on day 1. Now, if you roll a 1, you're trapped, and you lose 3 life, which sucks that there's like a fail case on this card that bodies you so hard. But on a 2 through 9, you create 5 treasure tokens. It's pretty good. It costs you 4 to activate the card and 3 to cast it, but 5 treasure tokens is a lot of ramp. And on a 10 through 19, you gain 3 life and draw 3 cards. Now, if you're looking at it, this is like the most likely thing to happen. 2 through 9 and 10 through 19 are the most likely things to happen, and they're both really, really good effects. Gain 3 life and draw 3 is great. But on a 20, if you roll a natural critical, you get a search your library for a card. If it's an artifact card, you may put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in your hand and shuffle. So you always get a demonic tutor. You can search your library for any card, but if you search it for an artifact, you plunk that thing right down on the field, son. So I think that's actually really good, but you can't build your deck around rolling a 20 on a card that costs a total of 7 mana to play and activate. I'm pretty sure you lose. This is probably just a fun thing that, again, is meant more for commander play than anything else. But man, when honestly, there's a lot of cases where I think I'd rather hit 10 through 19 than a natural 20. But maybe that's just me. Drawing 3 is great. Like, that's really, really good. In a lot of cases, that's going to be better than getting 1 really good card. So a lot of cases, it'll be worse too. But I don't think this sees much standard play, and I keep saying that about stuff, but I think this is specifically designed not to see too much standard play, to be honest. But in Commander, this will be a fun little card, and I'm glad the D&D people have it, and I'm glad that Wizards decided to actually do a roll a d20 card. Now, we're getting somewhat close to the end, but we still have a lot of hype cards. Matter of fact, they get hyper and hyper as we go on. Orb of Dragonkind is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an artifact. You may pay 1 and tap it, add 2 mana in any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast dragon spells or activate abilities of dragons. You can also pay a red and tap it and sacrifice it to look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal a dragon card from among them, put them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this, I have to say, for the 40th time this video, Commander staple in any commander deck that likes dragons, and there are quite a few of them. A lot of commander players like them some dragons, so there's that. But I do want to point out that in standard, this is also 2 mana ramp that lets you play dragons. Like, it lets you ramp into Goldspan on turn 4, and that's good enough maybe just by itself, but you need more dragons in the deck. But in the Galazeth Prismari deck, you've got Galazeth, you've got a Goldspan Dragon. You play this on 2, you can play Galazeth on 3, and then this taps for any color of mana once you have Galley down. So that in and of itself is really sweet, and sometimes it'll tap for 2 mana to cast a dragon or something. So that's really sweet, and if you really need a Goldspan, like right now, it only costs you 1 mana to very likely get it. So like, I think this is actually probably standard playable. So now you have to ask yourself the question, are we getting into the rares and mythics that are actually standard playable? Yes, but there is one more left that's a mythic, actually, that I'm not too sure about, and that's the Book of Vile Darkness. This is 3 black mana for a legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, if you lost 2 or more life this turn, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. You can also tap it and exile it, and artifacts you control named Eye of Vena and Hand of Vecna, excuse me, it's Vecna. To create Vecna, a legendary 8/8 black zombie god creature token with indestructible, it gains all triggered abilities of the exiled cards, which is neat because it'll have the triggered ability off of Book and the triggered ability off of whatever these other 2 cards are. So it's hard to actually judge this card yet. That's why I'm not super sure about it. I'm also not sure about it because it's going to often skip your turn 3. In order to play a card that doesn't actually do anything unless you have a way of losing 2 life on your own turn, on turn 3. I'm not too sure about it. At the very least, the best I can say is it's a whole bunch of Black Devotion. But if you want a whole bunch of Black Devotion, I'm pretty sure that Ayara's definitely better, and Underworld Dreams might even be better. A card like this, depending on how much damage you're taking to yourself every turn. But let's look at Grazilax, Illithid Scholar. And it turns out, by the way, that Mind Flayers are horrors. Just throwing that out there in terms of this creature type at least. But it's 3 mana, 1 and 2 blue for a 3/3 legendary. And whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may return it to its owner's hand. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So I really hate the term "or more" on the second half of this card. I just wish it was whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. I really don't think that would be too broken on a 2 toughness 3-drop. That's like relatively easy to remove. I mean, the guy's not going to see any play while Bone Crusher Giants in the format. I would imagine we can all agree on that. And like Eliminate's still in the format too. It's not seeing a whole lot of play, but you know, Heartless Act kills this 10 times out of 10 as well. So I'm not too sure how great the card actually is, but I do think it's a really, really sweet card. Your opponent has a decision to make when you attack in. As soon as you cast this, it doesn't even have to be attacking, right? The turn you cast this on main 1, you go to attack, and then your opponent has to either not block creatures, meaning you'll draw at least the 1 card, just the 1 card, but you still get to draw. And if your opponent blocks your guys, you might get to zip them back to your hand and do cool ETB stuff with them. But I think the card's going to be awkward a lot of the time, you know, even with cards like Baron or other creatures that have ETB triggers. You might not want to return them to your hand because then you have to pay the mana to cast them again. That seems bad some of the time. So I'm not too sure about this Mind Flayer, but I think that the way they, you know, created a legendary Mind Flayer is really sweet. And it looks like, just based on what we've seen today, that we might not see other Mind Flayers in the set. Just like we might not see other Beholders in the set because we've already seen Xanathar, Guild Kingpin, this guy right here, 6 mana, 4 in a black and a blue, by the way, for a 5/6 legendary Beholder. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. Until end of turn, that player can't cast spells. You may look at the top card of their library anytime, and you may play the top card of their library, and you may spend mana as though or any mana of any color to cast spells this way. So also they can't counter it because they can't cast spells this turn, which is really sweet. But this is a commander. This is 6 mana for, I mean, a decently fat dude, 5/6 or whatever, but 6 mana for a creature with no keyword abilities that you have to wait an entire turn to actually do anything with. And if you do get to do something with it, it's probably going to tie up a lot of your mana for the turn. So this is not standard playable, in my opinion at least. You know, it's traditionally nothing about this is actually standard playable, but it is going to be a really sweet commander, which is what it's meant to be for all the D&D players out there. Here's your Beholder commander. You've wanted it for 28 years. You finally got it. Is it cool? I think it's cool. Is it good enough for real competitive play? That, I don't think so. But now we're getting into the choice content, my friends, starting with some creature lands. Let's look at Cave of the Frost Dragon first. This is the white one. If you control 2 or more other lands, Cave of the Frost Dragon enters the battlefield tapped. You can also tap it for 1 mana, just a white mana, and you can pay 4 and a white to have Cave become a 3/4 white dragon creature with flying until end of turn that's still a land. So really, really neat in terms of creature lands, and a lot of them look a little bit like this, you know. A 3/4 flyer for 5 mana is a lot, right? But it's on a land. It's on a land, so a lot of times I'll take this over a Crawling Barrens, even though the activation costs 1 more, even though the activation costs a color to play, even though it won't get bigger as time goes on like a Barrens will, you know, or a Faceless Haven, for instance. I will take the evasive keyword ability a lot of the time. We'll look at Hive of the Eye Tyrant next. This is also a land. It's creature land. If you control 2 or more other lands, Hive of the Eye Tyrant enters the battlefield tap. You can tap it for a black. The creature land ability on this is you pay 3 and a black. Until end of turn, it becomes a 3/3 black beholder creature with menace. And whenever this creature attacks, exile target card from defending player's graveyard. It's still a land. Now, I posted this on Twitter and was like, wake up, honey. There's new cards. And somebody pointed out that you can see the beholder, the outline of a beholder in the negative space of the art here, and you can, and that's really, really cool. Like, that's super cool, and I hadn't noticed that until they pointed it out. So thank you, follower on Twitter. You're cool. But this one also pretty decent. You know, it's got a evasive keyword ability like Menace. It costs less to activate than the last land we looked at. And this is probably really good for sniping, you know, Croxes and stuff out of the opponent's yard. So I like a lot about Hive. I think it's actually got a lot it can do in Standard, and there's almost no reason not to play a copy of this in your mono black decks. Hall of the Storm Giants, though, is the blue one. If you control 2 or more other lands, it enters the battlefield tap, you tap it for blue, but you can pay 6 mana, 5 and a blue. Until end of turn, Hall of the Storm Giants becomes a 7/7 blue creature. Giant creature with Ward 3 that's still a land. Now, 6 mana is a lot. And in your blue deck, you probably don't want to tap 6 mana on your turn to attack with one of your lands. You actually have to tap 7 mana, right? Because you tap 6 and then you tap this to attack. And you probably don't want to do that in your blue decks. I mean, this could be like the win condition in a draw go deck or something like that. But if you're doing that, I think Crawling Barons is probably just better. Honestly, I mean, this does have ward, but by the time you actually can activate it, your opponent can probably pay for the ward. Very, very likely. So this can probably just be a one of in your blue decks, and it's likely fine to carry this card, but mana bases are getting really packed right now. You know, some mana bases care about snow. They won't play this. A lot of mana bases have a ton of pathways and triomes in them. They might not be able to fit this. A lot of decks will just want to play, you know, Faceless Haven if they're snow, or they'll want to play Crawling Barons if they're not snows, and they have room for a colorless land. So, you know, I'm not too sure about this one specifically because it looks like it's a control finisher, but I think in terms of creature lands, there's just better control finishers, all things considered. Just way too much mana to tap. But there's also Den of the Bugbear. This is the same thing. You know, you can control two or more other lands, and it enters the battlefield tap. So you want to play it early, basically. And it taps for a red. You can pay 3 and a red until end of turn. Den of the Bugbear becomes a 3/2 red goblin creature token with, whenever this creature attacks, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. So this one I really like. It's not as good at blocking as some of the other lands are, I'll give you that. But this is red, baby. We don't care about blocking. We don't block, it's red. I really like this one because it actually extends your board presence. This actually gives you a board presence when you attack with it. It's really good. You know, your opponent has swept the board of all of your small mono red guys or whatever, you know, your robbers and your fervent champions and stuff. Well, you've got a Den of the Bugbear, and I think that in a lot of cases that's going to be like better than a Faceless Haven. This again extends your board presence the more times you activate it, and for a deck like mono red that hates getting its board swept, this is a really good way to rebuild your board without even having to play spells. I like this one a lot. Oh, and by the way, at time of recording, we still haven't seen the green one, so you know that it's busted. Just beyond any repair, the green one is disgusting, I'm sure. But anyway, let's move on to Icing Death, Frost Tyrant. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for a 4/3 legendary dragon with flying and vigilance. And when it dies, you create Icing Death Frost Tongue, a legendary white equipment artifact token with a crypt creature gets +2/+2, or +2/+0. Whenever a crypt creature attacks, tap target creature defending player controls, and equip 2. So this is neat. A 4 mana 4/3 flying vigilance that becomes an equipment when it dies. The equipment gives a boost, and it makes your creature into whatever you want to call those, a tapper, you know, which is really, really sweet. And the equip cost is relatively low, but I still don't like it. I think that in terms of cards that are somewhat similar to this, Halvar is just a better card. You know, it's also an equipment that gives +2/+0 and all that. Halvar might be a little bit better, but Legion Angel is almost certainly better. If you're looking for a 4 mana 4/3 flyer in white, Legion Angel is probably what you want to be doing, to be honest. But this is a cool card, and I like that every color is getting an Elder Dragon, as we will see with the black one, which I think is really, really good, and in fact, one of the best cards of the day. This is Ebon Death Draco Lich, everybody. Draco Lich. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for a 5/2 legendary zombie dragon with flash and flying. Why does it have flash? It ETB's tapped, so it can't flash in and block something. But you may cast it from your graveyard if a creature not named Draco Lich died this turn. So that's so good. Like if one of your opponent's creatures dies on their turn, like if you have 6 mana and you Heartless Axe something on your opponent's turn, you can then EOT play this guy and just immediately untap and attack with a 5-power flyer. Like, that's so good. Like, yeah, it dies to Bone Crusher Giant, but your opponent's probably already played their first Bone Crusher when you go to cast this. And even if they do kill it with a Crusher, like, you just get it back after you kill their Crusher. Like, it's poetic justice. This card looks really good. There's a lot of ways to exile stuff in the format, which makes me not trust this as much, but either way, a 5-power flyer for just 4 mana that has flash and is recursive, like, yeah, give me this beat stick. I need it right now. This is a good card. Now I think we're down to like our last 4 cards, so this was technically the top 5. Let's take a look at Werewolf Pack Leader here. This is 2 green mana for a 3/3 human werewolf with pack tactics. Holy crap, something else with pack tactics. Whenever Werewolf Pack Leader attacks, if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater this combat, draw a card. So it's literally the same thing as the Kobold guy, 6 power or greater in attackers, and you draw. But this one's much easier to proc because it's a 3/3. I mean, it fulfills half the condition itself. But you can also pay 3 and a green, and until end of turn, Pack Leaders has base power and toughness 5/3, gains trample, and isn't a human. So the ability to get trample on your mana sink is actually pretty sweet in the late game. It gets like trample and +2/+0. Which is actually quite good. Again, like in terms of a mana sink, this is going to be fine for green decks in the late game. And if you activate its ability late in the game, then you only really need one other attacker at all that has at least 1 power to, you know, make this draw you a card. So that's Gas in the late game on a 2 mana 3/3. And that's a kind of package that comes together to make this card look really, really, really good. I think this is just like the mono green 2-drop, and mono green has been looking for a good 2-drop. It's Stompy, at least. You know, non-mono green has ramp stuff in the 2-drop slot, but there just hasn't been like an overstated creature that does more than just be overstated in the 2-drop slot in mono green for a good long time. And I think that this just takes up the mantle perfectly. A 3/3 for 2 mana that draws you cards in the late game is very good, and I think green's going to jump all over this. Now, it's honestly really hard to order my top 3 the way I want to, and honestly, that black 4-drop legendary dragon should probably be in the top 3, but there's another recursive flyer that I think is really good too, and that's Flame Skull. This is 1 and 2 red for a 3/1 skeleton with flying, and it can't block. Now, it's got rejuvenation. When Flame Skull dies, exile it. If you do, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play one of those cards. Now, even after looking at the reminder text, I have to admit that I'm kind of a numbskull, pun intended, and I didn't like understand this card until I read it like the 4th time. I was like, oh yeah, it exiles itself, so you can play it. So, basically, a 3 mana 3/1 flyer, you know, a Brazen Borrower stats. It can't block, a lot like Brazen Borrower. Although I guess Borrower can block flyers, but either way, 3 mana, 3 power, flying guy, so evasive. And when it dies, you exile it, and you can either play the card that you exile from the top of your library, or you can play the Flame Skull. So again, recursive, that can also sort of draw you cards. Like, it always sort of replaces itself when it dies, and I think that's really good. If you get a card that you don't want to play off the top of your library, you just replay the Flame Skull. And that's good. Like, I think this is probably just as good or better than Phoenix of Ash, and will almost certainly replace Phoenix of Ash when it leaves the format. Like, this is a fantastic card. It's better than you think it is. But up next, let's look at a card that I really want to make my number 1, but I'm not going to do it, because I think this is mostly standard playable, and my actual number 1 is going to be commander playable too, as well as standard playable, so I'll save it. But they're both black cards, if that makes you feel better. Gelatinous Cube, ladies and gentlemen. I only have a passing knowledge of D&D, and even I am aware of the Gelatinous Cube. So I'm super glad that the card exists and that this creature got a card, but the function of the card is what I'm really excited about. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for a 4/3 ooze with Engulf. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-ooze creature an opponent controls until Gelatinous Cube leaves the battlefield. And it's got Dissolve. X and a black, put target creature card with mana value X exiled with Gelatinous Cube into its owner's graveyard. So really, really sweet card here. We got our Ravenous Chupacabra back, everybody. I have been wanting a Ravenous Chupacabra in black again for so long. Only this time, it costs what Ravenous Chupacabra costs, but it has 2 extra points of power and an extra point of toughness, so you can't just Bone Crusher Giant. That's really, really good. I'm telling you, this is the card that I've been waiting for since Ravenous Chupacabra rotated out of the format. I've built so many decks that want exactly this card, and Black hasn't had access to it. It's really sweet. I mean, we see already with cards like Banisher Priest and Fiend Hunter and those traditionally white cards that an effect like this is good enough a lot of the time, even without the ability to effectively, completely digest the creature. I mean, once you have enough mana, you can digest the creature and poop it out into your opponent's graveyard if that's what you want to do. And that way, even if they kill your Gelatinous Cube, you've still killed their guy. So, it's a good thing to have. Fiend Hunter doesn't have that. Banisher Priest doesn't have that. For an extra mana, you get the ability to kill the creature forever, which I think is really, really sweet. But even if all it does is come down, be a 4/3, and erase something else from the board for a while, I think that's good enough. It's just as good as Skyclave Apparition 9 times out of 10, even though it costs an extra mana, because it can't be killed by Crusher, and Skyclave can. So, if you need proof this is a good card, again, just look at Skyclave Apparition. I know this card costs 1 more mana, but I really think the comparison is very solid. And I, again, will reiterate that I have wanted a card like this in my Black decks over and over and over for the last, year and a half, and I'm glad to have it for, not just, again, flavor, but definitely in terms of functionality. The card is unbelievable. But we have one more card to look at today. So far, at least. I'll reload Mythic spoiler before we get out of here. But what I think is probably the best card of the day for multiple formats is Sphere of Annihilation. This looks busted to me. It also calls back to the art on Damnation, which I think is neat. But in any case, it's like Damnation, but you push the frame out. And you get to actually see people observing the phenomenon. But anyway, it's X and a black for an artifact. It enters the battlefield with X void counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile Sphere of Annihilation all creatures and planeswalkers with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it, and all creature and planeswalker cards in graveyards with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters. I'm back. I had to show my face for this. This looks fantastic. It looks really good. I'm pretty sure that in competitive Magic, this gets far worse on the draw. Right? I mean, we can all admit that. I'm not saying the card is super broken or anything, but this does come down on turn 3 and threaten to kill all of your opponent's 1 and 2 drops. Exile them, exile them. That's so good against Selfless Saviors and Seasoned Hallow Blades and stuff. It's so good, and it's going to be good against most of the creatures in mono white period and mono red period. But not just that, it's going to kill all the Edgewall Innkeepers and stuff too. If you put it on 3, it can kill Brazen Borrowers, Bone Crusher Giants, Lovestruck Beasts, all of this amazing stuff. And even though it does cost a lot to cast, if you want to kill really big stuff, it's still worth it to do that a lot of the time. If you draw this in the late game, it can kill your opponent's Yorions or Planeswalkers or whatever, again, for a hefty cost. And a turn. You have to wait a turn, which is a huge downside of the card. But I still think it's going to be worth it most of the time, even against mono red. I think that Extinction Event is probably what you want to be doing. But this might be better. You wait until turn 4 to cast Extinction Event, and it leaves a few creatures behind. Or you go ahead and cast this on turn 3 for X equals 2, and it kills all of your opponent's Fervent Champions, Robber of the Rich, everything except for Annex, which can hurt, which can suck, by the way. But, if you cast it on turn 4 for X equals 3, it'll take up the Phoenix of Ash or the Annex, right? And you could die in the meantime. That's my only problem with this card, is because I envision a world where you need to draw a sweeper on turn 4. Instead, you draw this, and you don't have the turn to wait. So that could suck. But I imagine that this is probably going to be at its best when X equals 1 or 2. And that's not just standard. That's historic, modern, Commander. I think this card is going to see play in multiple formats. And even though there are some things that I admit are a little awkward about the card, it can be a little bit too expensive feeling at times. And you have to wait that turn. And waiting that turn can be excruciating or even, life-ending. So that kind of sucks. But I think that 9 times out of 10, this is going to be a very, very effective card, especially against a lot of the aggro decks in Standard right now that really like their 1 and 2 drops. We saw so many good black cards today. 2 amazing 4-mana black cards, and then a scalable sweeper that takes a turn to go off, but who cares? Black is stacked in the set so far, but we haven't even seen that much of the set, all things considered. So make sure you keep tuning in for more spoiler content. We're going to be doing preview content every day of preview season. So hit the bell, for the notifications. Sub if you haven't done that. Do that first. Then hit the bell for the notifications. And if you want to, like the video, and as usual during spoiler season, remember to share it around. Hit that share button. I never tell you to do this. No YouTuber ever does anymore, because who does this? But, if you have the ability to share it on, Reddit or Twitter or social media, Facebook, whatever, then do that this one time. During spoiler season, I like to do the share call to action, just to make sure that everyone has access to sweet spoiler content, and my videos get more views. That's why content creators do that. But anyway, I love you all, and I want to know how you felt about these. What's your favorite card of the day? How's the set looking to you so far? How do you feel about like different keywords that only occur once or twice? There's a lot to talk about already today. But what I'm most concerned about, as usual, is the function of the cards, the words printed on the cards and their effect on a game of Magic. And in that case, I think there's a lot of cards that will certainly affect Standard already today, and a buttload of cards that affect the Commander environment. So let me know how you felt about all this stuff, and I will see you tomorrow with another preview video. I am Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.